Hi guys, I'm out and about today in case you're not watching the video and you're just listening to the audio. Every time I do one of these podcasts or episodes for you guys and I'm out and about walking, number one, you're going to hear me get out of breath. I apologize for that. Number two, I realize I don't think I could look worse if I tried. Bunnings, by the way, if you don't know, that's a big hardware store here in Australia, and they're very large stores. Think like IKEA size. Like you could get lost in them and live in there for the rest of your life. But aside from having hardware, they're kind of famous for also their sausages. A lot of the pageant girls here in Australia, and when I say sausages, I mean like a sausage sizzle. So, you know, the sort of thing you might have when you compete in Saturday morning sport, which is a big thing here for the kids. One of the things that the kids look most forward to is this sort of really cheap bread and a cheap sausage that's cooked on a barbecue, Australian style, right? The barbie, not a proper barbecue like smoke and things like that. But anyway, Bunnings, you can have one of these sausage sizzles there, and I think it's like $3 for a sausage, and you can use that to raise money. So a lot of the pageant girls actually do Bunnings sausage sizzles to raise funds for charity. And I got a hat. I think this hat costs $5, and I actually need a new one. It's falling apart at the back, but I've taken this fishing a couple of years, and it's been really, really good. It's coming into summer here. Anyway, so talking about pageant stuff, I had one of my interview clients win a Miss America local the other day, which was tremendous. And it was interesting working with her because she messaged me and said, because she knew how to talk as a lot of you guys do. You know what to say, and it was something indirect that we had worked on, which was listening to a pump up playlist. But then, as I also pump up play like music, then as I also said to her, if you think, and I've said to you guys many times, if you think about athletes, they never just go into a match or competition cold. They warm up, very often to the point of actually breaking a sweat. Now, why do they do that? That's because you tend to perform better and you get the nerves out when you have broken a sweat. And so she told me that she'd been listening to her pump up playlist and she had been pacing, like in a good way, not a bad way. Hello. She'd been pacing up and down basically her corridor before she did her mock. I think she had a mock, but she'd been getting into the practice of listening to her playlist and then getting some movement in before she hit the interview room. Now that's as opposed to sitting in the corridor, because I've seen this quite often. You're outside the door of the interview room before you go in, and very often there's a chair there and you just sit there. The problem is when you're sitting there, it's very easy to start feeling a bit anxious, a bit rigid, or to get very cold. And so rather than just sitting there, at least stand up. And if you can, go for a little bit of a walk. Now, people might think you look crazy, but it doesn't matter. You give them something to look at, right? But I mean, I understand you probably can't go for a run right before you go into your interview room and be all sweaty. That's probably not going to, I mean, that's something I would do. I understand it's probably not acceptable in pageant land. But my point is, listen to music that gets you into a good mood. So whatever you want to listen to, you listen to. But then also just get in the habit of moving, especially if you're someone who gets a bit anxious or overthinks things. The easiest way to get out of that is just to move your body and physically shake it out. It's very difficult to think your way out of anxiety. If you've ever been there, or think your way out of being depressed, if you've ever been there, I have certainly. And thinking just makes it worse. It doesn't make it better. And so, you know, I will say also, we've got our first mock interview. So if you listen to previous last week's episodes, I want to trial doing weekly mock interviews. And so we have our first one coming up this Thursday. I think it's the 13th of November. I really should know this stuff. I apologize. But this Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, you guys will have to do the math backwards as to time zones and things like that, because you guys come from all over the world. I can't list every potential time zone, but I know it's this Thursday 8 p.m. Eastern, which is Friday, as in the day after, Friday midday for us over here in Sydney, Australia at least. And if you're one of our VIP members, so you're one of our paid members, then you can attend one of those for absolutely free. If you're not, it will cost just $19.99 US. Yes, that's not $99, $19.99 US. And that's because that's the same price as you would pay for a VIP subscription for a month. So it's up to you. You can, if you're a VIP member, you can attend for free. If you just want to attend the mock interview, then it'll be $19.99. So if you sign up as a VIP, you can attend four mock interviews a month for $19.99, or you can just attend one for $19.99. Either way, I think it's pretty good value. But the point of that is to give you guys as much opportunity as possible to practice, because I know that's something that very often you don't need more coaching, you just need an opportunity to practice. So we'll be starting that this Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, or as I said, the Friday after, midday if you're in Australian time. And I want to see how that goes. I know it's coming up to the end of the year. It's November as we speak. And so I know that, this is probably the worst time to launch a new service or new product. But also, I know that a lot of you going to be competing in 2026, and some of that, like for example, Miss Earth USA, some of that is pretty much literally on New Year's Day. So you're probably wanting a chance to practice. And so if you're interested in that, let me know. I will put links below as to how you can join. But to be honest, I haven't quite solidified what the best way to do that is with links and software and booking, because there's a few different pieces to put in play. I have booking software that I use, but it's a question of, what's going to be easiest for you guys and what's automated so that I don't have to be manually doing a lot of work just to get someone in. But send me a message. If all else fails, send me a message and we'll get you in, and we'll give this a go. I'd like to say at least until the end of the year, see what the interest is like, probably at least into January of next year as well. And then if the interest is there, then we'll keep going with it. But aside from the interview stuff, and as I've said, but many times it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I know that I keep saying this, but it's one thing for me to say it, and then it's another thing for you guys to have a chance to actually do it. And I think if I can bring you in with a group of other amazing women who are all practicing their interview, and as I said, when you join, because this is a group session, right? A group mock interview, when it's not your turn to talk, I'm going to get you to pretend that you're a judge, because I think that's really good experience training, if you like, for what does a judge look like? What is a judge looking for? Because you'll be acting as a judge. And as I think, as you sharpen up your awareness of what a judge would be looking for, that will make you a better contestant as well. So send me a message or send me an email this Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, and it'll be Friday, as I said, the day after midday. Just also, I want to quickly go over what happened at Miss Universe recently with Nawat, who decided to make Miss Universe Mexico stand up and then proceeded to berate her about not doing sponsor work at the sashing ceremony. And I've held off doing this because I don't want to give my opinion for clicks or anything like that. And it's not even about giving my opinion. I just want to share my thoughts and give you the way that I'm thinking about this, because some of you find it helpful, but I don't want to contribute to the gossip. Now, I will say up front, I have not been a fan of Miss Grand for quite a long time now. I've had big issues with the international organisation as well as the previous directorship of the Australian organisation. One of the big, and I've had a few people recently send me, I guess for want of a better word, scandals in the pageant industry and wanting my thoughts. And one of them was an absolutely terrible case here in Australia, and he ended up, I don't know if I should say this, so let's say he was doing some very untoward things that involved people who are underage, and he was found out by the police. He had certain materials on his computers, and I think now he's facing jail time, deservedly so. And then a parent messaged me about it. I didn't know, and then wanted my thoughts, and I said, given what exactly he had done, I didn't really feel comfortable covering it because it dealt with very, very young people. But it was a bit worrying to me. And she said, yeah, I get that because, if we talk about this, then it's a really bad look for pageantry. And I said, no, first off, that's not what I mean. Okay, I don't think we ever want to get into a position where we're not going to talk about things. First off, I think that's a bad idea if we're not talking about things. Full stop. Any industry, any field, any topic. But number two, I couldn't give a crap how it makes the industry look when someone is doing things that are bad enough to send them to jail, allegedly. So I haven't followed the case because it's properly dark, and I don't like following stuff like that. But it's not about whether it's good or not for the industry. I think anytime we discuss a topic or an issue as reasonable adults, we're not just shouting at each other and calling each other names, then I think it's a good thing. And I think you want those discussions because it adds legitimacy and validity to the industry. Whereas hiding our heads in the sand and pretending that these things don't happen and not talking about them, that's not the reason I don't want to talk about them. The reason I don't want to talk about them is because they're just really depressing and sad issues. But I guess that they should be talked about. It's not about hiding it because that's what's good for the industry. But there was a question that came up, which was, because I was reading some of the comments, how could people have known? Like, oh, I thought this person was a pillar of the community, etc., etc. And it got me thinking, is there a way that you can not tell, but that like your spidey sense makes your spidey sense tingling? Is there a certain way that some people are that makes, for example, my sixth sense sort of go off? And I looked at this guy who now is probably facing jail time, and I looked at his social media, and the post that he had pinned at the top, wow, that's a good look. Sorry if you're listening to this, I just took my hat off and I look at my hair, or what's left of it. But I looked at the pinned posts and they were all sports cars. And it was all sort of sports cars with very generic positive thinky posts like about hustle and things like that. That to me that's not a great start. If the most important thing about you is that you have expensive cars, but I mean, that's not enough, but that to me is not a good start. Then the other thing that set me off was, and bear in mind, this is with the benefit of hindsight, given now that I've heard about him, and what he's done, again, allegedly, I don't know, but he had a pageant, so he was directing a pageant here, and he said it was Australia's premier pageant, like Australia's best pageant or something like that. And there is no metric under which you can claim reasonably that his pageant is the premier pageant in Australia. And my experience over the last sort of 10 years in pageantry has been that if someone is boasting about material things, someone is posting without much substance and it's just about look at me, look at me, look at me, and then they overinflate what they do. Like everything they do is the best. This is the best. This is the premier. This is the only pageant with an advocacy. This is the most relevant all those sorts of things. I have found, and those people, you have to understand, I never feel comfortable around them. I can't really explain why, but they're not my people. And then what's happened very often in pageantry, more often than I probably would like to admit, is that a lot of other pageant contestants or girls like hanging around these people because they can offer them, in inverted commas, opportunities. Maybe it's a newsletter, a newspaper, a magazine, or a chance to walk in a fashion week, whatever. And okay, look, you do you. Obviously, it's a free country, free world. You do what you want to do. And then 6 months later, a year later, or whatever, something bad will come out. Like that person said something really untoward, or that person was doing really inappropriate things behind the scenes. And I just feel like, and I don't say this, but sometimes I feel like saying, well, I told you so. Like it, to me, not that I'm happy that these things happen, but it is affirming to me that when I get an uneasy feeling about someone, at least in the pageant industry, it has almost always proven to be accurate. I don't think it's ever been completely wrong or off base. And so that, bringing it back to Miss Grand, very early on, and this is probably 2017, 2018, when I first heard about Miss Grand, I interviewed every single, I was at Miss Grand Australia, and I interviewed every contestant there, literally everyone. I went there, sat down, this is in the days of having an actual video camera, and I interviewed each girl for maybe a couple of minutes, 2 to 5 minutes each, because there were a lot of them. Probably 20 of them anyway. And that was all well and good, because Miss Grand Australia, from what I was seeing at that time, was doing a great job, and the advocacy was a genuine one. But then I watched our girl compete at Miss Grand International, and I was shocked when she walked up on stage. I think this was a swimsuit round, and the thing they flashed up behind her on the big screen was her measurements. You know, the bust, waist and hips, 32, 24, 34, whatever it is. And I thought, that's odd. That's weird. That's distasteful if it's supposed to be a pageant. And remember that Miss Grand's advocacy, at least back in those days, was to stop war and violence. And I thought, okay, what has that got to do with the advocacy of promoting peace? You're putting up the girls' measurements. Like, I'm very confused. And there's I don't see how you can sort of word that or verbiage that as being empowering. I think that's just weird. And then that left a bad taste in my mouth. So again, as I was saying, like, you get a feeling sometimes. That was the first time I got that doesn't feel right. Then I actually worked with one of our national contestants. So someone who went over as our Australian title holder. I worked with her, and she came back after having a terrible time there, and having a terrible time with the Australian organisation as well. She and the director had butted heads, and the director had threatened not to send her, blah, 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 blah. And then she got back, and I jumped on a call with her, and she said the first thing that Nawat had told her, so the director of Miss Grand, the first thing that he had said to the girls who were assembled there was, you are here to be seen, not heard. You are here to be seen, not heard. Now, you might look at that and go, well, she's lying. This wasn't in a public-facing interview, and you have to understand there's no benefit to her. There's no logical reason for her to be lying about that. It's not like an interview that I was publicizing, so why should she lie? And she placed. I think she placed top 20 or whatever it was, so it's not even a case of being bitter and resentful that she was unplaced. I choose to believe that what she said was completely the truth. Now, you can't couple that with flashing up the measurements, and then this guy telling them basically they're there as eye candy, they're not there to use their voice. And then also, you have to bear in mind, Miss Grand, out of any of the international pageants or any of the pageants that I know about, has had more scandals, more title holders resign, and more title holders fired, depending on who you believe, than any other pageant that I know. I mean, the very first time Miss Grand came across my awareness was back, I think, in 2016. And this is when I was brand new to pageants. I was attending a pageant here in Sydney, Australia. And someone was introduced to me. It was Claire Parker. And she, at that time, was Miss Grand International. She was also Miss Grand Australia, but she was Miss Grand International. And at that time, I had no idea what's going on. No one mentioned to me the fact that Claire was actually first runner-up at Miss Grand International, and that she had only been crowned Miss Grand International after the title holder had stepped down / resigned / been fired. I don't know if it's ever come out in public exactly what happened there. But Claire herself had only been crowned when the actual winner had been removed. No one mentioned that to me, which I thought was odd. Then, I think 5 years later, maybe in 2021, Claire decided she was going to compete for Miss Universe Australia. Bear in mind, this is 4 or 5 years after her reign is over. Now, Nawat didn't like this. So what did Nawat do? And you could say it's Miss Grand that did it, but Nawat's in charge of Miss Grand in a way that is not normal for pageants, probably in the US or Australia or UK. It's really his show, right? there could be a board or whatever, but what he says goes. At least that's my understanding of it. He decided that because Claire was going to compete for Miss Universe Australia, and he didn't like this, that they put up an official notice, which again is shorthand for Nawat said this, official notice that Miss Claire's not allowed to use or reference Miss Grand anymore in her titles and publicity. She's forbidden from using the title of Miss Grand International. 4 or 5 years after, yes, Bob, my cat is screaming at me. 4 or 5 years after her reign was over. And that is just one case. If you've followed pageant news at all, you'll be well aware that Miss Grand has had multiple cases like this, even as recently as last year, where the title holder decided to step down, and Nawat said, "You didn't step down, I fired you." And then I think he proceeded to say on a live somewhere, and I'm paraphrasing, he basically said, "I'm not saying this to bully, but she has smelly armpits," or something like that. And he has a history of body shaming women. I used Perplexity AI to look this up. So, it's on the record. It's on the internet, at least as far as, things on the internet can be trusted. But Perplexity is pretty good at looking things up and giving you the sources. And he's been on record saying things like, her torso is too long and her legs are too short. He's had multiple title holders resign, step away, denounce his actions, and it's pretty clear, and I've been told this behind the scenes, it's pretty clear that he has his favourites and that he plays favourites. And the Miss Grand judging, I'm not going to even pretend that it's vaguely objective, because it really doesn't seem so to me. Anyway, you put this all together, and also bear in mind at one stage he was sort of calling out Miss Universe as being not as good as Miss Grand, and that he had forbidden Claire, the previous Miss Grand, 4 years or 5 years, as I said, after the fact, because she competed in Miss Universe, he had dethroned her, or said she wasn't able to use that title anymore. Now bear in mind, Nawat takes over, is now part owner or whatever it is, or is on the Miss Universe International team, which I'm going, hang on. Even despite everything else I've said, that seems very hypocritical. You previously basically dethroned someone from your pageant for competing at Miss Universe. I'm pretty sure you've called it a minor pageant, or you've bickered about Miss Universe before. I specifically remember there was one video that he put up on the Miss Grand International page, and it was the Miss Grand International logo smashing through the Miss Universe logo. The implication being that Miss Grand is better than Miss Universe, and Miss Grand basically is a new Miss Universe. And so it's kind of hypocritical to me to then see him take apart ownership or join the Miss Universe team. It's also very confusing, I think, from anyone watching from the outside. It's like, why is this guy who's director of Miss Grand and has his own pageant, why is he now on the Miss Universe team? And also, why is he in front of the girls lecturing them? Like, who is this guy? Where has he come from? And the thing is, this incident has blown up bigger than any pageant news I've seen in a long time, probably ever. It's been picked up by one of my friends in America, sent it to me and said, "Have you seen this?" And it was on like Today, USA Today or something. It's hit mainstream media, and there's a lot of people now, because no one knows who Nawat is outside pageant circles, people wondering, who's this old Asian guy who's lecturing Miss Universe Mexico and berating her in public and basically shaming her and making her feel very uncomfortable. And so that is not a good thing, that the only time, pageants hit the mainstream media is in this type of scenario. But all of that is to say, when people see this and they denounce it, it is again only validation to me that I was right about this guy from the first, like from the off. And what is it? So what is it that set me off? So as I said, you look at little things, right? And they add up over time. You look at the fact that he puts up measurements when the girls walk on stage in a bikini. You look at the advocacy, which is stop the war and violence, which no. Yes, an individual can change the world, but young women walking in bikinis on stage is not going to stop a war. If that really is the case, then please go to Gaza or go to Ukraine and do that, because we could do with more peace in the world. But it's very, very say the right thing, but you don't have to do anything. So there's that. And then, as I said, Nawat having this whole, the Miss Grand logo smashing through the Miss Universe logo and dethroning people because they're competing for another pageant 4 or 5 years after their reign is over. It all seemed very bickering and very small. And then after all of that, to then take a position on the team of Miss Universe, which is massively hypocritical. And then what I will say, the final straw for me is there are people jumping in to defend his actions. I had one of them comment on one of my posts and basically shame Miss Universe Mexico for saying that she's too much, and his proof, or her proof, I don't know if it was a man or woman, the proof apparently of Miss Universe Mexico being too much was that she liked to eat. And what did they do? They posted up photos of her eating. Now, I don't know about you, but photos of when you're eating are the least flattering photos that anyone can take of you, or second only to if they took a photo of you when you're on the toilet sort of thing. And I just thought, and the whole justification so the argument was that, they're lying about Nawat, which they're not. The video is the video. There's no lies there. It's eyewitness. It's first-hand proof, right? They're lying about Nawat, and he only wants to put on a good show. And this is the thing that really scared me. There are a number of people who defend him and his actions because he puts on a good show. And someone said it's the best pageant, and the reason was because it ran on time. And I'm like, look, I fully get that. I really hate it when pageants run 2 or 3 hours behind time. But that in no way justifies his actions. You can't justify the actions that he took with Miss Universe Mexico by saying, but at least the guy puts on a good show. Or all the guy wants to do is put on a good show. Or even his argument was that, and then he broke down into tears, which I thought was laughable. It's like, you're not sad that because you're sorry. You're sad that you got caught, and now everyone basically is piling on you. And by the way, you kind of deserve it, right? So the tears thing was that was hilarious to me. Like, well, don't, I was going to use a swear word. Don't act like that, and then maybe people will leave you alone, right? But the whole thing is the guy is a narcissist. He loves being in front of the camera, and I've always said that I think a director should be more behind the scenes. Yes, they need to be forward-facing when they need to be, because they are in charge of the brand, of the pageant. But you shouldn't have to be on stage all the time and be having all your photos taken. That's a huge warning sign to me. It's when the director needs to be the center of attention more than the women. And so this sort of thing all came to a head, and it's like, to me, this is expected behavior from this guy. If you've never heard of him before, it's not surprising to me. It literally is, what has he done this time? But my takeaway from it is that you have to stop making excuses. If you're someone who makes excuses or is going to compete in a pageant like this anyway, you're really taking your reputation into your own hands. And I've seen multiple people now compete for Miss Grand and make it out to be some sort of really, I don't know, some really admirable venture, when the truth of the matter is, with someone like Nawat in charge, and the whole flashing up of the measurements, I don't know if they'd still do that now, together with a sort of advocacy that doesn't really do anything. Competing in Miss Grand, I think, says a lot about you. And maybe I'm reading into that too much. In fact, I'm definitely reading into that too much, because, sometimes you can just do it to have some fun, and that's great. But let's not make let's not make it more than it is, right? Don't tell me it's about the advocacy. Don't even tell me it's about empowerment, because Miss Grand is pretty much as far away as you can get from it, as you can see from the video now, right? And again, that's not a word of a lie. You can go watch the video. It's still up there. If I was him, I would have taken it down. But that's me. But the sort of attitude of this middle-aged Asian guy, and in fact, it doesn't matter that he's Asian, but he's an Asian guy, standing up and saying to Miss Universe, I didn't give you the opportunity to talk. Now, if you're going to tell me that someone like that is interested in women's empowerment, you need to explain that to me. And I get that we all say things at moments that, we don't mean, but this is not one of those. This is showing you his attitude towards women. And his attitude is, you should all sit down, shut up. Remember what I said about when I worked with a Australian title holder? He said the first thing that he said to them was, "You're here to be seen, not heard." Now, doesn't that jive very neatly with the video where he's standing up, he's got his hands behind his back and he's right at the front with a microphone, and all the girls have to sit down and listen to him talk, and they all have to sit down and listen to him question why Miss Universe Mexico hasn't done a sponsor shoot or whatever. And then when she continues to argue with him, he calls for security. And you're still going to try and convince me that Miss Grand is about women's empowerment and that there's a real advocacy. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it anymore. And I think for pageants how do we make pageants relevant? You know what? Stop having people like him. Stop competing in pageants like that, right? Pageants that are run by people like him. Because you're only validating his attitude towards women, his behavior. The best thing that could be done for pageants to take them seriously, at least in the Western world, would be to not have this blow up internationally because someone like him is in charge. Stop picking people like him to be in charge of pageants. Stop picking people like him to be on something like Miss Universe. Because the attitude, you have to understand, as I said, this is what really annoyed me, is that this is like the first time pageantry has really hit mainstream media since probably the resignation of Noelia, right? Noelia Voigt and Uma Sophia. And so you have to understand, from the public's point of view, the last time they heard about pageants was Noelia resigning and the whole Miss USA thing blowing up. And then they haven't heard anything until now, and it's this middle-aged man berating Miss Universe Mexico, telling her that he didn't give her the opportunity to talk, and then calling security on her, and then crying about it afterwards. This is why the whole question about pageants being relevant or not, to me, is there's no argument to be had, because if that is the only exposure you've had to pageants, of course you're going to have a negative experience. And it's not our place to argue about it. We have to show people, not talk about it, we have to show people that we are doing a better job. If we do a better job and we make headlines for something good rather than something like this, then we won't need to keep answering questions like that. But if, as an industry, we keep putting people like Nawad in charge, we keep giving him the global stage, and he keeps saying the things he says, and then there's a portion of the industry that's apologizing for him or forgiving him or saying that people are lying about him and then saying, well, he puts on the best show. No, because that industry is not it's not an industry that I want to be a part of either. This is why I keep saying I'm not a pageant fan. I'm a fan of the women who are competing, but the women to me come first. Someone like Nawat, he doesn't put the women first. Who does he put first? Probably himself. Then probably the sponsors, because he was talking about all the money. When he did his apology in inverted commas, he was talking about the money he had apparently as well. He puts himself first. That's why he's always on stage. He puts his sponsors in front of the women. And I think he puts probably even the show in front of the women. For him, it's about putting on a show. It's not about the women involved. Otherwise, his whole body language, his whole demeanor, and the words he uses and the scandals he's had, again, saying things like a previous title holder has smelly armpits. We can't defend stuff like that. And the fact that there's even a percentage of the pageant fan base or pageant contestants who are defending someone like him, it completely invalidates the industry. Because that's about as polar opposite as you can get to women's empowerment as is possible. And I will say, he's not the only person in the industry who's like that. Very early on in my career, there was a pageant running over here in Australia. It was run by someone, it was owned by someone over in America, but we had an Australian branch of it here. And I don't know exactly what happened, but one of the Australian or a couple of the Australian title holders had a falling out with him because they went to his pageant. Internationally, let's just say the judging didn't seem particularly unrigged, if that's the way of putting it. The person who won, no one could understand how she won. There was an audible gasp when she was announced as the winner, but she was also very tight with the director, and so that raised all kinds of eyebrows. But anyway, this international director proceeded to call one of his own title holders, let's say, the word for a sexually promiscuous woman, beginning with W, and then a 4-letter word beginning with S and ending in T. I'll let you fill in the blanks. And he called her this on social media, one of his own title holders. Now, what was really shocking to me, I had a friend at the time, and just after this director had done that, I mentioned like this behavior was completely unacceptable. And it was shocking to me, at least back then, because this was almost the first scandal I'd heard about in Pageant, or my first negative experience. And she defended him. She said, oh, yeah, but you have to understand, he's that way, he's gay. He's eccentric. What? No. Now, that's a terrible thing to say about the gay community, first off. And secondly, that wouldn't be an excuse. What does your sexual preference have to do with calling a woman those horrible words, especially when they're your title holder and you've done on social media? And they say, oh, yeah, but also he did it on his social media page. It's not public. His page was set to public. And even if it's not, it's still in front of a large group of friends and people who worked with him. And I just couldn't understand how this now, as it turns out, that person who was defending him, she had become one of his title holders because the actual title holder had stepped down, because the title holder hadn't wanted to work with him. And so the title holder who had crowned stepped down, and then this person was defending him happened to get the title. So isn't this like, it all makes sense, right? After the fact, like, you're defending him because now you get to wear a crown. That is that's just disgusting behavior. I can't stand that. But karma does come around, because what happened was that system doesn't exist anymore. It cannibalized itself. So the director here was a piece of work. The title holder who got crowned was a piece of work. The title holder stole the system from the director, then ran it into the ground, so much so that that whole entire system doesn't exist anymore. The previous director went off to start her own thing, which never really went anywhere because no one wanted to work with her, because she was also a piece of work and was a bully. She was also someone who was very narcissistic and wanted to be the center of attention. I remember she forced her fiance at the time to propose at the pageant on stage. She would claim that it's spontaneous, but everyone there who was there competing at the pageant told me otherwise. And so rather than letting the title holders have their moment on stage, she decided to steal the spotlight by forcing him to propose to her on stage in some sort of horrendously staged and ridiculous act. And so that system cannibalized itself and no longer exists. So out of all of this, red flags. You work out what your own red flags are. I've worked out what mine are over the years, and people will say, oh, well, just because some person does that doesn't mean, they're a bad person. And I get that. But things add up. Like, if it's not just one red flag, it's another one and it's other one. And also, if it happens over a period of years. Like, as I said with Nawat, he's not just had one title holder step down. At this point, it's a pattern. Even Perplexity AI said this. He has a pattern of saying something ridiculous, outrageous, commenting on a woman's body, and then he apologizes. And then it's quiet for a while, and then he does it again. By the way, this is exactly how you gaslight someone in an abusive relationship. You apologize, you make a great show about it, you cry some crocodile tears, and then that person goes, oh, maybe he isn't a bad person, maybe he really does feel sorry, maybe he'll change. I mean, as someone who's worked with people who've been in domestic violent relationships, that is the exact pattern. 101, abusive relationships 101, because if you're just horrible the whole time, your partner would have left. It's this whole gaslighting thing. But if you notice this, stay away from it. I really don't care if you tell me it's your dream. Like, I get it's sad. Like, if you find out that, for example, with the previous leadership of Miss USA, if that had been your dream to be Miss USA the whole time, but you saw Noelia resign and then you decide to go into it anyway, at that point you're really on your own, because you know what you're walking into. You should know, unless you're completely naive to it. And look, you go into it forearmed, forewarned, and if you want to take your chances, you take your chances. But I would love for it to get to a place where we could be competing in pageants that we actually respect and that treat us with the same level of respect as well. And I'm hopeful that with the changes at Miss USA, this is one of the reasons I was optimistic about the whole changes, because I hope that's going to filter down and there's going to be that element of respect restored to the industry. And maybe that's a silver lining to the incident at Miss Universe as well, because Nawad apparently has been restricted from participating in future activities at this iteration of Miss Universe. I don't see how he's really going to live it down in terms of the damage to his reputation. I mean, it's deserved damage. But at this point, like, really, if you're going to defend Miss Grand, I think you're on your own, honey, because after he treated someone like that, I don't see how you can possibly think that he is for women's empowerment. I think what he is for is himself in front of a bunch of beautiful women. That's what he's for. And so maybe something good will come from that. Maybe even Miss Grand will be turned around. I wouldn't bet on that because that's his pageant. But, you know, restricting him from participating in further activities, I think that's a good start. The world, literally the world, seeing him for what he is another good step. But at the end of the day, it comes down to you guys deciding where you want to compete and where you're going to spend your blood, you're going to spend your money, where you're going to spend your time. And I would say don't put it somewhere where you're going to be disrespected, regardless of whether you win or not. It's really that simple. That's my whole takeaway from this, is that I knew there was something off about him. This has just proven that. But I was thinking that probably back in 2017, 2018, 6 or 7 years ago. And you could say, oh, why don't you tell people? Because I don't... That's only going to get me in trouble, number one, and I don't like being in trouble. Like if I'm telling people don't compete in this pageant. But number two, I don't really feel it's my place, because just because one person has a bad experience at a pageant doesn't mean the next person will. And so you kind of have to work out in your head, okay, when is it an isolated incident? And then when does that isolated incident repeated a certain number of times? When does that become a pattern where you can really turn around and say, I wouldn't recommend that you compete in that pageant? Maybe that's something I have to get better at figuring out. I have told people behind the scenes when they're working with me one-on-one about the specifics of what's happened in certain pageants, because I get told everything just because of the number of interviews I've done and the network I have. And so if you work with me one-on-one, then I will tell you, okay, this is what happened. But that's because that's in private. I don't really want to make that information public. I have no interest in gossip, in causing controversy. I know there's a lot of pageant YouTubers and industry figures who love this idea of gossip and news, and here are my thoughts. I'm like, well, why do you need thoughts on what happened at Miss Universe? It's terrible. Get rid of him. It should be that simple. And don't compete at Miss Grand International because he's in charge. Why do we need your thoughts on it? Like, it's that simple, right? It should be anyway. And so, yeah. Well, those are, to be a complete hypocrite, those are my thoughts on what happened at Miss Universe. But as I said, for me, it's more a case of know your red flags. And when you see them, pay attention to them, because they do come back to bite you big time. Yes, it might be 10 years later, but it could also blow up in your face. And there are enough pageants out there now that I'm sure you can find one that would at least respect your time, your effort, your money. Because let's be blunt, at the end of the day, pageants in terms of the platform and the audience, they're not what they used to be 10, 20 years ago. And so excusing someone's inappropriate behavior in pageants simply because you think, oh, but then I'll have a platform. It's so simple in this day and age for you to create a bigger platform and a bigger audience, and an audience that's invested in you, not in a pageant. And to have that audience be bigger than what most pageants are capable of creating in this day and age. It didn't used to be like that 20 years ago, right? But now, I know so many pageant girls who've talked about, Star Wars or nerdy stuff, and their followings have blown up, and they've been invited to red carpet this and red carpet that, and it had nothing to do with a pageant. Pageants need you more than you need pageants. That's been the biggest reversal in probably the last 20 years. And I don't think most of you have actually recognized that. I honestly think most of you still think it's the other way around. That somehow if you win a Miss USA or something like that, that you're going to get a platform. And certainly if you win a Miss USA or Miss America, of course you're going to have a certain notoriety and have a certain platform. But it's still up to you to decide what to do with it. And if you hadn't been building your platform before, you're still going to have to figure out your own platform. And to maintain the momentum after you hand over your title, it's still going to come down to you. And so I really want you guys to hear that pageants need you more than you need pageants. If you're articulate, ambitious, well-spoken, you can make anything happen. Pageants can be a stepping stone, but don't treat them as more than that. They are a potential stepping stone. There are many other different platforms or opportunities you can use to get to where you want, regardless of whether it's being a Victoria's Secret model or a lawyer, right? Pageants can be a stepping stone, but there are other options available. And so after all this, if you look at what's happened and you go, I don't want any part of that, I don't want to deal with someone like Nawat, I wouldn't blame you. But it's not to say you've got to give up on your dream, because even if you wanted to be Miss USA or Miss Universe, the question would be why? Oh, hopefully it's because you want a platform and people can see the amazing human being you are. Okay, well, go do that anyway. Pageants are not the only way for you to do that. I think there's a very good argument to be made with social media and things like that. They're not even the best way for you to do that. There are many better ways, faster ways of you building a genuine audience and having a genuine platform. There's a big turkey running over there. I'm going to take that as time to get... I've just been a really long episode. I apologize for that. But to circle back to the beginning, there are 2 turkeys running around. Mock interview. Wow, segue. This Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, or it's Friday noon Australian time. Send me a DM. I'll put the links below if I have them. But as I said, it's early days figuring out what the best process to get this happening. But let me leave it there, and I'll speak to you next week.